How can inflation be curbed? And what should be done so that low-income families do not suffer serious problems with price increases? Visualeconomik viewers, I am absolutely certain that many of you have either asked yourself these questions or have heard this concern on the street, at work, or in the media. And the truth is that it is no wonder. Take the case of Spain, for example. The inflation over recent months in the West has meant that in many countries, basic items such as bread, eggs, and oil have seen their prices shoot up almost stratospherically. And faced with this situation, what exactly are the governments of the world doing to solve the problem? Well, at first glance, nothing too comforting for those of us in the poorest classes.
Fed raises interest rates by 0.75 points to fight inflation.
We have already told you many times here on Visualeconomik, the most direct way for governments, or rather central banks, to fight inflation is to raise interest rates. As a result, people ask for less credit, demand is reduced, and the bottlenecks that cause inflation finally give way. But let's be clear, for a humble family who can barely do the shopping at the supermarket, if the central bank tells them that they are going to raise their mortgage interest rates, well, what can I say? That doesn't look like much of a help, does it? So beyond basic interest rates and macroeconomic issues that are difficult to understand, many political groups around the world are calling for new measures against inflation. Measures so that the most disadvantaged are not the only ones who suffer the most from this whole situation. And can you guess what one of them might be? Well, check this out.
Price controls enter the European inflation debate. As inflation remains high, age-old discussions around price controls are flaring up again, with Hungary's Viktor Orban putting them into practice. Yolanda Diaz's vice president of the Spanish government initiative to cap food prices fuels friction in the government.
Indeed, what politicians are proposing is to set maximum prices by law so that companies cannot exceed that limit. Some enlightened people have even gone a step further. Check this out.
Belarus bans inflation.
I don't know. It seems pretty straightforward, don't you think? After all, if prices are prohibited from rising, then prices will not rise and there will be no inflation. Problem solved. Case closed. Why don't we think of this before? Well, let's not be so hasty though. The truth is that price controls are nothing new. In fact, these type of controls have been carried out throughout history and were used particularly after the harsh war periods in the 20th century. And before jumping to quick conclusions, I will tell you one thing. There are cases where the controls have worked and cases where they have been a disaster. So that is exactly what we're going to talk about in this video. Can price controls be a good measure for fighting inflation? What historical examples of success and failure can we find? What are the contributing conditions that ensure the successes or failures of such measures? Well, stay tuned, because today on Visualeconomik we're going to answer all of these questions, and in this case we're going to start with some history. What would you think if I told you that in Venezuela, Christmas is no longer celebrated in December, but 2 months earlier? And yes, just as I said, at the time of uploading this video, it has been 9 years since Venezuelan Christmas has been celebrated at the end of October. You don't believe me? Well, check this out for yourselves.
Nicolas Maduro announces the early Christmas in Venezuela. Through a video published on his social media, the president of Venezuela announced the advancement of Christmas dates to the month of October, as he did in 2020.
Yes, I know what you're thinking here. What the hell is wrong with Venezuelans? Why don't they celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December like almost everyone else? Well, you see, this whole story goes back to March of 2013. At that time, Hugo Chavez, the former president of Venezuela and the leader of the Bolivarian Revolution, had just passed away, and therefore it was necessary to replace him with a new leader to follow in his footsteps. That leader was Nicolas Maduro, and to be honest, let's just say that Maduro was not Chavez. Maduro was another member of the Chavista party with apparently the same ideas and projects as Chavez, but again, he was not Chavez. He had neither his charisma nor the same level of support, nor all of the things that had made the deceased leader so characteristic, which means that a good part of Venezuelan society decided not to continue supporting Maduro's party after the death of Chavez. What's more, by that time, Venezuela's inflation, which we know so well today, had already started to pick up. To give you an idea, in the last full year of Chavez, inflation in Venezuela was 1.5%. However, in the first year of Maduro, that climbed to 12.5%. The president not only got off to a very bad start in his new position, but on top of that, rising inflation ended up sinking him in the polls. And take note, because here comes the best part. In order to regain his popularity and settle himself in power, President Maduro had a brilliant, or rather brilliantly hilarious, idea. Check this out.
Quisimos decretar la llegada de la Navidad porque queremos la felicidad para todo el pueblo.
If Christmas is now 2 months earlier in Venezuela, it's because Nicolas Maduro wanted to notch up his votes back in 2013. It's as simple as that. Although, I know what you're wondering, did bringing Christmas forward by decree really make people happier in Venezuela and make them vote more for Maduro? What's the point of that? Well, let's not fool ourselves. Venezuelans, at least at the family level, continued to celebrate the holiday in December as they had done all of their lives. It turns out that when Maduro brought forward Christmas, his real intentions were not really to bring forward Christmas joy, but something quite different.
Venezuela prepares a Christmas with strict price controls.
Not only was the Christmas season brought forward in time, but it was also a plan to control prices to the max so that both children and adults could do all their Christmas shopping in advance. Yes, at a price that was almost free of charge. To give you an idea, price controls were so strict that Barbie dolls went from being worth around 3,000 bolivars to costing 533 bolivars. Some electronic equipment, such as computers, suffered legal discounts of up to 83%, which made them worth little more than $77 at the exchange rate of the time. And you may ask, can a company sell at such low prices and comply with such controls without losing money? Well, obviously, no. But it's not like they had any other choice, really. To enforce these controls, the government sent groups of military personnel to certify that product sales were carried out at the prices set by the government. This, in the first instance, appeared to be an electoral success for Maduro. Dozens of products were distributed at discount to its citizens at a time when inflation was becoming very concerning. And keep in mind that we are talking about 12.5% inflation, not very different from what is being suffered in Europe and the US right now. Be that as it may, if Maduro managed to scrape votes by fixing prices once, why not do it again? And even better, why not launch a price control package that would regulate the entire economy? Well, as we say around here, no sooner said than done. In less than 2 months, in January 2014, Nicolas Maduro published his Fair Price Law.
Saldrá en Gaceta Oficial y será ley de la República, la ley habilitante de precios justos que establece las normas para ganancia máxima del 30% de todas las actividades económicas.
The Fair Price Law was somewhat lighter than the Merry Christmas Decree. Instead of forcing huge and unaffordable discounts for businesses as was done with the new Venezuelan Christmas, the new law only limited the profit margins obtained by merchants to a maximum of 30%. Later on, Maduro brought forward 2 new laws, the Law of Agreed Prices and the Law of Plan 50, with which he specifically regulated basic products such as food and medicines. In short, from 2014 to 2018, Venezuela became the perfect experiment in price controls as a way to fight inflation. The question is, did these controls work, and what were the consequences of such policies? Well, let's find out.
Cheap bread for today, no bread for tomorrow.
I want you to pay attention to this video clip. What you have just seen is a video of the Decazo looting. Remember Maduro's early Christmas plan? At that time, Daca, a home appliance company, was the main company affected by the price controls. And no, I am not only referring to the fact that it was affected by the economic losses caused by price controls, which is also true, but it also suffered huge and savage looting by Venezuelans who did not want to miss out on products at prices so low they were almost free. You see, prices, beyond determining how expensive or cheap a product is, also determine the quantity available of those same products. Let me explain. Imagine that the clothing companies of a country competing in the market are able to produce 100 million pairs of pants, and those pants are sold at around $20, right? If they set a higher price, say $25, consumers will think the pants are too expensive, and they won't all sell. But if they set a lower price, say $15, the less competitive clothing companies will lose money, stop selling pants, and production will be reduced. In both cases, after altering the price, the quantity of pants sold falls, and society ends up losing material wealth. Thus, the original price of $20 is the only price capable of causing the maximum possible number of pants to be distributed among society. This is what is known as the optimal price. That being said, if a maximum price is set lower than the optimal price, the most likely outcome in most cases is that there will be a shortage of products. There will be less productive companies that will not see it as profitable to sell those prices and will simply close down. The lower the maximum price, the more companies will close and the less production there will be. In turn, demand will grow. So as soon as those products are available in the surviving companies, citizens will pounce on them, just as they did in the case of the Decazo grab. Not surprisingly, beyond that, the issue of the Decazo was only the beginning of the problems that controls in Venezuela entailed. See for yourself.
They made us lower the prices of everything we sell by 15%. Everything ran out in a very short time, and today we have almost nothing left. This is the testimony of the owner of a deli in the Guaycaipuro market in downtown Caracas.
Following the successive price controls established by the Maduro government, many companies, particularly local companies with little capacity to react, began to have serious supply problems. Firstly, because at such low prices it was impossible to meet all the demand, and secondly, because some imported products such as medicines were more expensive than the retail price set by the government. And this is exactly what happened with the pharmacies in Venezuela. Pharmacies that in many cases bought their medicines from abroad. It became even more critical when the bolivar depreciating in the market day by day. So, plain and simple, they had to stop selling many of their drugs.
Shortage of medicines kill in Venezuela. The shortage in pharmacies and hospitals endangers the lives of thousands of chronically ill and transplant patients.
On the other hand, in order to control the lack of supplies of food and other basic products, supermarkets in the country began to show images like this one. Basically, in order to make food available to all, rationing mechanisms had to be implemented to limit Venezuelan purchases. That is, as long as we're talking about the legal market, because another consequence of the price controls was the growth of the black market. A market where the dominant currency was the dollar, which, by the way, was used with the guidance of the exchange rate published on the website you are seeing on screen called Dollar Today, since naturally, the price of the dollar was also officially regulated by the government. However, beyond stories and anecdotal cases, is there any statistical element that certifies that all these shortages really happened after the price controls? Well, the truth is that there are, and keep in mind that the source of all this report is one that uses data from the Central Bank of Venezuela itself, which does not exactly intend to go against the government's measures. Well, what this report says is that before the imposition of price controls in 2013, the average shortage of basic goods was around 12%. But look at what happened just 2 years after Maduro came to power and imposed his fair prices.
The price controls sustained during the period under study have resulted in an increase in the shortage of products in the family food basket, reaching a maximum of 39.93%. Omar Castellanos and Homero Maldonado, University of Cucuta.
So we could say that the case of Venezuela is a textbook case, a case where price controls and the fixing of maximum prices below the optimal price that we had mentioned earlier on led to shortages, closures of companies, and lower production. And a case where, surprise, surprise, inflation was not slowed down in the slightest despite countless price controls. But now, back at the beginning, I told you that events do not always turn out this way. I said there are cases in which a price control can favor families while keeping production intact. And the question is, how exactly is that possible? Well, let's find out, but before we do, take a look at this graph. Yes, I'm sure many of you already know, still more than 50% of the people who are watching Visualeconomik are not subscribed to the channel. How can that be? If you like economics, if you want to know which policies work better and which work worse, and in general, how to enter the formidable world, be sure to subscribe. There are very interesting videos coming out all the time. So, to help change this graph, hit the subscribe button, and then we'll get back to the video.
Beyond Venezuela.
I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but after the coronavirus pandemic, everyone had to buy antigen tests, whether you were rich or poor. I'm sure at some point you went to the supermarket and you bought one. Well, I say supermarket, but if you were Spanish, you would have to go to the pharmacy. Because I don't know if you realize, but unlike many countries like the USA or Portugal or France, in Spain, you could only buy antigen tests in pharmacies, not in supermarkets or any other kind of store. And guess what? The prices of the tests were ridiculously high. To give you an idea, while in Spain the tests were sold in pharmacies and cost more than 12 euros. In France, they were sold in supermarkets for €1.24, in Portugal for €2.49, and in Germany for €2.80. As you can see, the difference was enormous. So how could it be that Spain had test prices up to 10 times more expensive than its neighbours? One of the main factors in answering this question was precisely the enormous monopoly that exists in the supply chain of the pharmaceutical sector in the country, from importers to distributors, including the pharmacies themselves. You see, it is not only that in Spain, pharmacies had the exclusive authorization to sell this type of test, but also within the country, competition between pharmacies was, and still is, extremely limited. And so, there are laws and regulations as absurd as the fact that there cannot be 2 pharmacies within 250 meters of each other, or another one that says there cannot be more than 1 pharmacy in towns of fewer than 4,000 inhabitants. And don't even think about selling drugs online to encourage lower prices. That is very restricted. Only non-prescription drugs can be sold online, and only established pharmacies pharmacies can sell them. In other words, this monopoly goes all the way to the internet itself. The other possibility is forbidden. And in the specific case of the tests, there were very similar limitations for importers and distributors. And that is how a huge pharmaceutical monopoly was formed, which is what ended up making the tests cost up to 10 times more than in neighboring countries. Now then, what do you think the Spanish government did to lower the price of tests in the face of the impact of the pandemic? Did it allow supermarkets and other stores to compete against the monopoly of pharmacies and the pharmaceutical distributors? Well, no. What it did was this.
Spain sets a maximum price of €2.94 for self-diagnosis tests in pharmacies.
Hey, what can I say? In that case, the price control worked, and it worked like a charm. Tests started selling much cheaper, no companies went bankrupt, and there was no supply problems of any kind. Just the opposite of what happened in Venezuela. But of course, knowing this, the question now is, why did the price control work in Spain? But on the other hand, Venezuelan pharmacies ran out of medicines after their respective control. Well, to find the answer, we first have to rewind for just one moment. Imagine that the clothing companies of a country competing in the market are able to produce 100 million pairs of pants, and those pants are sold at around $20, right? If they set a higher price, say $25, consumers will think the pants are too expensive, and they won't all sell. In normal situations where firms compete, as in the example of pants that we gave, the optimal price is reached by the simple effect of competition. That is, if a competing firm sets a price that is too high, customers will go to their competitor and the original company will be forced to lower the price again. However, when there are monopolies with market power, as is the case of pharmacies and pharmaceutical distributors in Spain, companies can raise prices above the optimum price without fear of losing customers. After all, competition is practically non-existent and customers cannot go anywhere else. And so, if a state-regulated price control close to the optimum competitive price is imposed, then the price control becomes an absolute success. Now, does this mean that we can put a price control on any product suspected of having market power? Does this mean that price control has no other detrimental effects besides scarcity? Well, I'm afraid it's actually not that simple. So, you're going to have to keep watching.
Today good, tomorrow, let's see.
Imagine that, as some governments in Europe seem to want, we set a maximum price for supermarket products to fight inflation. The first question would be, what prices do we set? I mean, in the case of tests in Spain, it was very easy. You just had to compare prices with France or Portugal and set the price to something similar. But with all the dozens of products in supermarkets, all so different and so unique to each region, how could you do that? One alternative, what is the one used in most cases, is to negotiate with the larger companies a price that is close to the optimum, a price that does not make them lose money, but is lower than the current prices. The thing is, that has at least 4 problems. Firstly, that companies could mislead you and tell you that they have higher costs than they really do. No, companies wouldn't do that, surely. Secondly, supermarkets might offer such low prices that smaller competitors would not be able to compete, and in the long run, competition would diminish. Thirdly, despite fixing prices, companies could raise the price of other non-regulated products or simply reduce the quality of regulated products. Companies wouldn't do that either, right? And lastly, but not least, even if the price is negotiated today, tomorrow's costs may go up and companies may face losses that make them cut production, which is exactly what happened, you'll remember, in Venezuela.
We ended up accepting prices for our products that were not the prices we proposed, but these prices were agreed upon 6 weeks ago, and in the hyperinflationary period that Venezuela is going through, they have become outdated. National Federation of Cattle Raisers of Venezuela.
In short, as long as there is market power, which most probably is not the case of supermarkets, which usually have trade margins below 3%, price control in the short term may work well, but in the long term it becomes much more complicated, even more so if you intend to control dozens of products. This is why, if the aim is to curb monopolies, reduce stratospheric profit margins and, in short, combat high prices, the best thing to do is encourage competition. And this can be done in 2 ways. 1, through better regulations or through the action of competent bodies, which, returning to the case of Spain, would have translated into allowing supermarkets to sell the tests, or simply allowing the pharmacies themselves to compete with each other. And 2, with competition authorities that penalize companies that abuse the market. Are you familiar with cases like this one?
Google suffered one of its biggest setbacks on Wednesday when a top European court upheld a ruling that it broke competition rules and fined it a record €4.1 billion.
Which of course also entails other problems, but we'll talk about that at a later date. At this point, it's now over to all of you. How would you fight inflation beyond raising interest rates? Do you know of more cases of price controls in your countries? What measures would you implement to achieve effective market competition? You can leave us your answers in the comments below. And as always, don't forget that here on Visualeconomik, we release new videos every week, so subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell button down there so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, please like it, and we'll see you next time.